وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good day, everybody. Many Arabs believe and condemn U.S. policies in the Middle East for being shaped by the influence and money of the Israeli lobby. To discuss the true and untrue assumptions about the Israel lobby in Washington and how to counter it, we have two distinguished guests and experts. Dr. Khalil Jahshan, who has a long history in Arab American lobby activities, and Professor Brad Roth of Wayne State University. Before we get started, I have a program note. We are coming to you not just on radio, but also in video. If you go to the Facebook page of US Arab Radio, you can see us in video on Zoom. So let's get started. My first question is for both guests, and let's start with Dr. Jahshan. To what extent is American foreign policy in the Middle East shaped by the influence of the Israeli lobby? Dr. Jahshan.
Good morning, Atef. Good morning, Brad. It's good to see both of you. Very good question, Atef, to start with. I would say to a great extent, it is not the only factor involved in determining U.S. policy in the Middle East. There are other competing, if you will, agencies, both government agencies and public factors and agencies involved in influencing U.S. decision makers. But the fact of the matter that for the past 60 plus years since the founding of AIPAC, it has served as the kind of the spearhead, if you will, of pro-Israel activism in the United States, particularly here in Washington, although it's a national organization and has, of course, activism and attempts to influence decision makers throughout the country, and has become the premier influence in this respect. But it's not the only one. I mean, we all know that the American Jewish community, which is heavily pro-Israel, but not necessarily totally pro-Israel, particularly now, I think this war has really caused a serious influence on the Jewish community, particularly its youth, where almost half, 40% plus, reflective of the national average, seems to be opposed to current U.S. policy and to Israeli policy in Palestine, particularly in Gaza. But there are other groups, major groups, I mean, at least 200 different groups in the Jewish community. It's not a small community in terms of its size, ethnically, 2% of the population in this country. But you're talking about hundreds of organizations of national significance: American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these groups are influential, and they play a key role in the electoral process in this country, influencing the elections of officials from the president on downward, but particularly in the legislative branch. But in addition, it's like I said, it's not limited to the Jewish community. There is the Christian right also that has its own agenda with regards to the Middle East and has a lot of influence, particularly on the Republican side of the equation. So my answer to your question is to a great extent. It is the spearhead, it is the trendsetter, it is the group that leads campaigns in many ways with regards to pro-Israel policy. And even though we have seen somewhat of a reduction in its influence because of the differences between it and the current Israeli government, but it still remains a powerful factor in U.S. Policy making in the Middle East.
I have follow-up questions that I will have for you throughout the next hour. But let's go now to Professor Roth.
Yes, well, I agree with all that's been said. I think that the importance of the lobby has been on the Democratic side of the aisle. I think on the Republican side, the positions have been overdetermined by other factors. And particularly, as Khalil points out, the significance of Christian Zionism. There is a very strong evangelical base in the Republican constituency that has been very much oriented toward a particular view about Israel theologically and otherwise, and a kind of anti-Islamic perspective that has a very strong hold in the Republican Party. So I think really the issue has to do with the relative absence of opposition among Democrats. And that has a lot to do with the effect of AIPAC and other organizations in Democratic primaries. You see, for example, the effort to oust Jamal Bowman in New York based on his views on this situation. So in those marginal seats where it's possible to primary candidates who have been vocal on this issue, that's where it has had the most concrete significance. I think more broadly, what it has done is have an impact on the discourse as a whole. It has chilled many people who are reliant on at least quiescence from pro-Israel voters, from making the kinds of bold statements that they might otherwise make in response to the kinds of events that we've seen unfold. And of course, we've seen support even among some Democrats for this ludicrous effort at legislation to sanction the International Criminal Court for having issued arrest warrants against the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister. So 42 Democrats in the Senate, in the Congress, House of Representatives supported this. I think that sort of thing comes from a kind of pressure from a base that can be mobilized by AIPAC and other such organizations.
Dr. Jahshan, you said that Israel lobby is not the only factor that shapes U.S. policy in the Middle East. And the question now is there an effective Arab lobby? And if the answer is no, then why?
Good question. Definitely. There is no effective pro-Arab, if you will, in general, lobby, mostly because of developments in the region itself and developments within the Arab American and Muslim American communities. That doesn't mean there are no lobbying efforts within these communities. There's a lot of activism, but I wouldn't describe it as effective or as strong as AIPAC, for example, or even the efforts on the extreme right, let's say the Christian right that Brad just referred to, evangelicals and what have you. We've had attempts for the past, let's say, 40 years, going back even a little bit beyond to the early 70s. There were attempts at organizing within the Arab American community initially, and later, more recently, within the Muslim American communities in this country to organize an effective lobby. The record has been mixed. There was some progress over the years that lasted maybe a decade or two, but somehow the community has not been successful enough to produce, let's say, an organization like AIPAC that lasts for so long, like, 60 plus, going back, as a matter of fact, to the early 60s, when AIPAC was officially unleashed or founded. Most of these efforts have been short-term and did not last as long as they should have, from my perspective, for many reasons. Political commitment, political involvement within the community, availability of resources, differences of opinion on political issues, the allowing, if you will, Arab issues from the Arab world to penetrate Arab American politics and divide the community in so many different directions. After all, you're talking about, unlike the pro-Israel lobby, which lobbies for one issue, which is U.S.-Israeli relationship, you have 22 Arab countries, most of whom have relatively good relations with the United States. So who do you lobby for? What aspect of this U.S.-Arab relationship, which is complicated, like I said, 22 different portfolios, dealing with all kinds of issues ranging from arms sales to human rights, to advocacy for democracy in these countries, and so on. And so the issues tend to be more complicated and more diverse, and therefore the community has not been able to maintain, I would say, even though the efforts, as I said, were started in the late 60s and early 70s, were not successful in terms of being maintained as a solid lobbying organization. It's there, it comes back and forth, it goes up and down, but there are still some organizations that are still doing that today in both communities, the Arab American and the Muslim communities, but they are, I wouldn't say they are at the same level or can compete with AIPAC. But there are changes also in Congress itself. I mean, to me, there is more resistance, for example, in the House of Representatives by members of the House of Representatives. Brad just mentioned one, Jamal Bowman, who's being opposed by AIPAC and by the Jewish community in general. But there are at least a dozen that I would call the conscience of the legislative branch. A few dozens of members of Congress, led by some of the famous 12 that we know, that reject AIPAC's influence and have an independent agenda. The Bernie Sanders of this world, the Rashida Tlaib of this world, the Jamal Bowman of this world, Mark Pocan of this world. These are people from various backgrounds, the different ethnicities, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others that have led, if you will, an intifada of some sort politically within Congress to limit the pro-Israel influence and so on. And that's why they have been targeted. They've had, I would say, more influence on their own, even though I'm not denying that they are supported by Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, but they are also equally supported by American Jews who are of the progressive or liberal political persuasion that have made it possible for them to to function openly and effectively.
Professor Roth, if you were to advise the Arab American community and their governments behind them, what would you tell them to have an effective lobby?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Yeah, one of the difficulties, of course, in terms of mobilizing support is that when you have a community that is largely based on more recent immigrants, people are slower to become involved in the political process. It takes a couple of generations, and so that sort of bodes well for future possibilities in the Arab and Muslim communities. It's a slow process of getting people mobilized in that way. I think in general there is still a basic problem of balance of empathy in the American political community. The failure to identify with Palestinians in the same way that people identify with Israelis. There is lurking in the background of all of this discourse the sense that Israel is this outpost of Western civilization in unfriendly terrain, and people are inclined to put themselves in the place of those who are suffering on the Israeli side, and to not have an equivalent understanding of the privations that are faced by Palestinians. So the most important thing, I think, is to bring home the stories of what it is that's actually happening to people in the territory. And I think that is becoming more and more salient in the American political discourse. Recent polls showed that there are 38% of Americans now who believe that the United States is doing too much to support Israel and doing too little to support Palestinian humanitarian interests in the conflict. So I think that it really is a need to focus on the human element in all of this, to get people to empathize in ways that unfortunately they have been impeded from doing so far.
Atef, may I add a point to that?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, from my long experience in this effort within the Arab American community, experience that lasted at least 3 decades, I would say if I were to pin it down to at least like 3 sources relevant to your question in terms of why not a strong Arab lobby. In addition to what I said, I would like to highlight 2 or 3 factors that have been an impediment. One is involvement. Involvement is a key in a system, in a political system like the American system, which allows political involvement in the decision-making process. It is not a perfect democracy. I wouldn't claim that, but it does have democratic tendencies and allows for activism by ethnic communities or religious communities or just political communities who are interested in advancing their interests. Involvement is a key. So when I look, for example, at the Arab American community, okay, a community of about 3.5 to 4 million people, and I look at the American Jewish community, which is about 5.8, 5.9 American Jews in this country. And I look at the Muslim community, which is about estimated 8 to 9 by some, including some overlap with the Arab American community, 8 to 9 million people. I see more involvement by members of the Jewish community than Arab American and Muslims. For example, if I were to take, this is non-scientific, okay, just kind of experience. I would say if I were to take all major American Jewish organizations and add up their membership, I would probably come up with about 2 million people, acknowledging there is an overlap nationwide, okay? You can't get 2 million Arab Americans and Muslim Americans to identify as members of all of our organizations as Arab American and Muslim Americans. So I would say the lack of involvement is a key in this respect. The second one is resources, giving resources. I've never seen an ethnic community in American politics that donates to its causes as much as the American Jewish community. So that is key. And that goes back to what Brad said earlier, being mostly recent immigrants, particularly the Arab American community and Muslim American communities in this country are not prone to political activism a la American style, which is activism, donations. They go hand in hand. Activism is not enough. You got to support your own cause. And if you do not, then it becomes just emotions, but no practical results. And the last one related to that is what we in political science call the sense of political efficacy. Because of being, if you will, a new immigrant in our communities, people do not feel, they say, who am I? to change U.S. policy. I mean, this is a superpower. How can I change it? Does my vote count? Does my dollar count? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It doesn't take more than one vote and one, let's say, subscribing to an organization, joining its membership, supporting it, that lobbies for your own cause. That's all it takes. And all it takes is one citizen at a time to make change in an open democratic system.
Stay with us. We will come back to resume our discussion after a short break.
Hey, Michigan drivers, are you sending or answering group chats behind the wheel, checking emails at the light, calling family or friends on the commute? Michigan's hands-free law makes it illegal to manually use electronic devices while behind the wheel of a vehicle. Breaking the law could mean fines or even community service. Go hands-free, just drive. It's the law. Learn more at michigan.gov/distracted-driving. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
In a perfect world, everyone would be a perfect driver.
Hands at 9 and 3, everyone.
9 and 3.
Everyone would follow all the rules.
Please, go ahead and merge. I'll make room.
Thank you, fellow driver.
And nothing unexpected would ever happen. Even the squirrels would know the right time to safely cross the road. In this perfect world, you wouldn't have to wear a seatbelt. But in case you hadn't noticed, we don't live in a perfect world. About 1,000 people in Michigan die each year in vehicle crashes, and thousands more are injured. Wearing your seatbelt reduces your risk of death in a crash by 45% in a car and by 60% in a pickup truck. So until we find a perfect world to drive in, make our imperfect world safer by buckling up. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to Radio Baladi. We are discussing the Israeli lobby in Washington and how for the Arab American community to have an effective, equally effective lobby. My question now will go to both guests, and let's start with Dr. Jahshan because of his long history in Arab American community, and also to Professor Roth because he is in the state of Michigan. Now, Dr. Jahshan, you talked about lack of involvement in the Arab American community. But I know that 100,000 Arab American voters in Michigan say they are not voting for President Biden for a second term because of his support of Israel in the Gaza war. How do you describe? What's your say about that?
It's interesting that this war, because of the kind of emotional, if you will, response by many in our communities here in the United States to the events that took place on October 7 and subsequently with regards to the war waged by Israel against the people of Gaza and particularly the heavy casualties. I mean, even the President of the United States, who describes himself as a Zionist and the most supportive ever of the state of Israel, feels somewhat guilty and responsible to the point of trying once in a while, in moments of isolated moments of enthusiasm, to show his concern for the human toll, if you will, the casualties. So that has changed, if you will, by getting the community excited, getting the community more engaged, getting the community more involved. What I'm talking about is the steady involvement. Just think about it. This 100,000, great. It's superb, very encouraging to see such a motivation right now and excitement. But if that was a steady effort, it existed before October 7th, for example, that would have had a lot more impact than it is doing now. It is important that it's happening. I think it's a positive development. I hope we can maintain it as a community, because frankly, when we get to the day after, quote unquote, whatever that means these days, the conflict is not going to be resolved tomorrow or the day after, right? So it would be interesting to see whether the excitement we are witnessing today in the community and the involvement we are witnessing in the community, as commendable as it might be, that will be a lasting phenomenon that we will see continue in the long term. That will generate essentially what you are referring to as an effective long-term lobbying effort or lobbying arm to the community. I am definitely, as I said, excited and supportive of the action I have seen thus far. It is your right as a citizen in a democracy to exercise your right to vote and or to hold your vote as you see fit. So it's basically, I leave it up to everybody's conscience to do what is needed as a citizen on November 5th to exercise their right to tell or to send a message to the candidates as to where we stand. And that could become crucial, frankly, in states like Michigan. You know better, Brad knows better than I do, the importance of 100,000 votes. In other states also, it's not only Michigan. There are at least 3 or 4 or 5 other states where such numbers could make a difference, could reverse even the results. And frankly, that's what's causing this revival, if you will, or this epiphany on the part of the president right now. All of a sudden, he is talking like the opposite of what has been talking for 8 months. What happened? I mean, did the Holy Spirit strike here or what? I think basically it's not the Holy Spirit. It's November 5th. I mean, as a Christian, I'd like to claim the Holy Spirit, but I think it's November 5th that impressed upon the president to kind of try to not necessarily reverse course, but to try to find an exit ramp, not just for Netanyahu, as the media people are saying, but for himself, because frankly, he needs an exit ramp between now and November. Otherwise, he's going to be exiting the White House.
I want to pile on to that. I think the epiphany here really, I think, more than anything else, came from the statement by Netanyahu's national security advisor that the war was anticipated to continue on throughout the end of the calendar year. That was really a dagger pointed at the Biden administration. This really was a signal that what the Israeli government hopes to do is to wait this out until Donald Trump can be elected president in November. And Biden, I think, quite correctly understands that the war in Gaza is a major threat to his presidency because of how the opposition is situated in particular states, especially Michigan. This would be a devastating blow to Biden's reelection chances if Michigan were not to go in his favor. And he desperately needs for the temperature to be turned down between now and November. And Netanyahu has every incentive to do the opposite. You see Biden actually affirming that he understands that Netanyahu is pursuing those war policy as he is because he needs to do it for his own personal political reasons. And of course, Netanyahu faces the prospect of ending up in prison. And so he needs to stay in power in Israel in order to avoid that, and needs to perpetuate the war in order to prevent any reckoning that's going to happen politically post-war for him. Biden understands that he's being manipulated by someone who has an agenda that's fatal to the president's political aims. And so I think that more than anything explains the epiphany. Unfortunately, it's not the Holy Spirit.
We'll come back after the break with a tough question for both my two guests after the break.
With more than 30,000 successful in vitro fertilizations, IVF Michigan is now ranked as one of America's best fertility clinics, according to Newsweek magazine. IVF Michigan fertility centers are the recognized leaders in high-quality fertility care. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 9 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. A founding member, American board-certified Dr. Nicholas Shama, is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. He has performed over 20,000 successful IVF cases, and it's helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. When it's time to get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at one of America's best fertility clinics, call IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio toll-free at 855-952-9600. 855-952-9600.
Clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it and you really want
5-year-old Lila and her mom are on their way home from Grandma's, singing Lila's favorite song. A few blocks away, 25-year-old Dylan is visiting friends at a small party. He finishes off his last beer,
Later, skater.
gets in his truck, and starts for home. Mom and Lila turn onto Maple Street.
If you
So does Dylan.
know it and you really want to show it. If you're happy and you know it's all correct.
Every 50 minutes in the United States, someone dies in a crash involving a driver impaired by alcohol or drugs. If you're impaired and you know it, don't drive. Drive sober. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
Get ready for an amazing experience at Ishtar Restaurant on 15 Mile Road in Sterling Heights. Enjoy excellent hospitality from owners Ali Al-Baghdadi and Fatty Bottom, serving the best in Mediterranean food. Try Chef Ali Al-Baghdadi's famous shawarma, the best Iraqi grills and food, and the best Arabic and international dishes. Dine in our authentic atmosphere or take out. Call 586-698-2585 or check us out on Facebook. Ishtar Restaurant practices all CDC guidelines and is open every day, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Have an amazing experience today at Ishtar Restaurant, 3625 15 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to Radio Baladi. We are discussing the Israeli lobby in Washington. And here is my tough question for both guests. And we'll start with Dr. Jahshan. And I must say, I don't condone violence on either side. But America and the West say Israel has the right to defend itself. That's okay. But Israel is an occupying force. And Israeli militias in the past, like the Haganah, killed and expelled Palestinian residents from their homes back in the 40s, perhaps in the 30s also. Why ignore Israel's history of expulsion and killing? Dr. Jahshan.
Because it's easy for politicians to do that. That's what they do. They're not bothered by the facts. Politics is not necessarily based on history and facts and objective study of issues. And this came to haunt us in this crisis, frankly, because we are dealing with a problem in a complicated region that goes back, way back, more than 100 years of history. And the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and particularly the Palestine aspect of it, did not start on October 7. Yes, there was some violence on October 7, and we condemn that. But there is an occupation that precedes that, that goes back to 1967. There is a Nakba, a dismantlement of Palestinian society that goes back 76 years to 1948. That has to be factored in. So it's easy for politicians. They cannot complicate their decision-making process with history. But frankly, ignoring history is what destines U.S. foreign policy or any other foreign policy to failure if it ignores that. So U.S. policy has had that tendency since 1948 to somehow clean the slate for the Israeli side and deal with kind of like our daily bread. You know, let's deal with the soup du jour, the event of the day, and not focus on what motives there are, what prompted this. It would have been, I think, a totally different situation today, Atef, if the U.S. government on October 7 asked itself that question: what happened? Why did Hamas do that? What on earth motivated this 1,000 or 2,000 people to rebel, if you will, to cross the border, to commit what they committed? What was the reason for that? And then trace it back and see what needs to be done, instead of taking a one-sided view of this event and pretend that history started early in the morning on October 7th. That basically condemned the position of the United States to the dead end that it finds itself in today.
Professor Roth, any comment?
Well, it's difficult to unpack all of this. There is so many generations worth of history here, and so many things that have occurred that have affected people's consciousness about the conflict. But I would say most fundamentally, the difficulty is that when you have asymmetrical conflict, where you have a powerful army that is organized in a traditional way that it can at least purport to abide by the laws and customs of war in terms of targeting legitimate military targets, irrespective of the termed collateral damage that comes with such targeting. There's a sense of familiarity that this is war. Bad things happen in war. People make allowances for that. They make allowances for what the United States did in World War II in Germany and Japan. There's just a kind of familiarity to the notion of using force in this highly structured way in the service of a sense of national and human security, whereas it's much more difficult for people to identify with armed groups that have no real prospect of taking on a powerful military in the traditional manner. The only way that they can make themselves felt, unfortunately, is by attacking soft targets. Unfortunately, that creates a dynamic here where people who find themselves in desperate circumstances, whose conditions over the 17 years of siege that have already been imposed upon the Gaza Strip, find themselves with no outlet for the frustrations of that circumstance than to strike back in this way. When they do, that is then seen as a kind of off the charts form of violence, something that is immediately identifiable as repugnant in the way that even killing 30 times as many people in an established military campaign does not resonate in the same way. And so unfortunately, I think that's at the root of the difficulty here.
Atef, may I add
Yes, go ahead.
to that? I think that's exactly what the U.S. government in supporting or taking a one-sided approach to this conflict on October 7th in support of Israel, and what the Israeli government, the Netanyahu government, was hoping for, that somehow what they are doing in Gaza will be viewed in the historical context. This is, a war, a non-symmetrical situation, as Brad just mentioned, and will somehow justify, if you will, or maybe allow people to overlook the excesses on the part of the Israeli side. That didn't happen. And why is the interesting question is why that didn't happen. It didn't happen because when, we have a history of that in the United States. We're not an innocent bystander in this phenomena. I mean, we've had situations like this in Iraq. We've had situations like this in Yemen. We've had situations like this in many other conflicts we were involved in. And the issue of collateral damage and to what extent that has came to haunt us on several points in our history. But what happened here is the uniqueness of the State of Israel. The State of Israel justified its existence all along since 1948 on moral ground. It used the Holocaust. It used Jewish tradition. It used Jewish morality. It used all that stuff to justify its existence. Therefore, it is not necessarily anti-Semitism or bias against Jews or bias against Israel that holds Israel at a different kind of stand, as much as it is a response to that moralization, if you will, or the moral grounds on which the state was justified to start with and continues to be justified. So what public opinion is saying worldwide to Israel today is, okay, fine, you want to justify your existence on that basis, then you need to measure up to this. You can't simply walk in and say it's collateral damage when you kill 37,000 people and mutilate or injure 86,000 people, or whatever today's number is, because it keeps evolving every day. So people are having a hard time with it, not in absentia, if you will, but in light or in the context of how Israel justifies its existence. So the Israelis are having a hard time accepting that. They are having a hard time realizing that they have a role to play in the difficulty they are facing today because of how they justify, if you will, Zionism, and how they justify their political existence that finally, after 76 years, came back to haunt them.
I would add to that you have this phenomenon now of the Genocide Convention being invoked. The Genocide Convention, obviously motivated by the plight of European Jewry during the Holocaust. There's, on the one hand, a tremendous sense of affront that anyone would dare to invoke the Genocide Convention against a state that emerged from genocide, against a state that whose very foundations lay in the ruins of the destruction of Jewish people in the Holocaust. And yet the difficulty is that this is not a frivolous case, whatever else might be said about this. I was in The Hague listening to the Israeli argument against the provisional measures, and one thing that really struck me about the kind of argumentation that was being given was the lack of reality of what the circumstance was here. The Israeli litigator was essentially playing to the cheap seats, making the claim that it was outrageous that they were even there under these auspices, when in fact the court had already made clear in its prior provisional measures judgments that this was a matter that it was taking seriously, that it considered the claims to be plausible and therefore justifying judicial intervention. And so there's a real difficulty of people being able to confront this kind of reality. And I think international institutions play a very important role in establishing that there are impartial baselines here that have been transgressed, whether or not rising to the level of genocide. We also have ICC warrants against the Prime Minister and Defense Minister of Israel for war crimes and crimes against humanity, which are easier to prove than genocide. And so I think you have the potential here of calling people out in terms of the moral foundations of their support of the state of Israel up to this point.
And I wonder, Brad, if that has something to do with the quiet kind of announcement yesterday that Judge Barak, the former Supreme Court judge of Israel, and the premier, probably legal authority in Israel, decided to quietly resign his position at The Hague in representing Israel. I think he's having a hard time probably justifying the arguments and the failure to make sense, as you just indicated.
Right. Well, also it's important to note that although he obviously is a stalwart in support of Israel's position generally, that he is very much a foe of the current prime minister, or the prime minister is very much a foe of his, one might say, and again this clear manipulation on the part of Netanyahu to maintain the conflict for his own personal political reasons, I think is resonating. We can only guess as to why Barak decided to withdraw. But I don't think it's a coincidence that it came in the wake of this announcement that the Netanyahu government plans to continue the war for 7 more months. That cannot come as good news to anyone who is trying to resuscitate Israel's standing in the international community.
There is another interesting situation, Atef, that I would like to bring to your attention. The Attorney General in Israel wrote an interesting letter that didn't get a lot of coverage out here, but it did get quite a lot of coverage in Israel, challenging the Netanyahu government to initiate an investigation, basically telling the government that it is time right now to start an investigation into the events and the responsibility for October 7th. And Netanyahu's chief of staff answered quickly that this issue has been discussed by the government. There is no reason to investigate. But the Attorney General basically is saying, look, in light of what we are facing in the International Court of Justice and internationally, in terms of international public opinion, it behooves the government of Israel to start an investigation at this point. But definitely Netanyahu is not buying into that. So it remains to be seen what we end up seeing as outcome of this.
Netanyahu there is looking to his short-term interests ahead of his long-term interests, because the principle of complementarity governs the actions of the International Criminal Court. So the International Criminal Court is obliged to stand by and allow Israel to, insofar as is perceived to do so in good faith, to pursue an investigation of these allegations. If Israel refuses to do that, that very much opens the way for the confirmation of the arrest warrants by the pretrial chamber. And that's clearly why the Attorney General was seeking to get a change of course out of the administration for this. And obviously Netanyahu has his own reasons for wanting to maintain this position.
We'll come back after a break.
Hey, Michigan drivers, are you sending or answering group chats behind the wheel, checking emails at the light, calling family or friends on the commute? Michigan's hands-free law makes it illegal to manually use electronic devices while behind the wheel of a vehicle. Breaking the law could mean fines or even community service. Go hands-free, just drive. It's the law. Learn more at michigan.gov/distracted driving. A message from the Michigan Office of Highway Safety Planning.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain. Life for Relief and Development has now been rated as one of the best charities for humanitarian aid. Life's humanitarian projects span the globe, and Life is celebrating its 30th anniversary of providing essential life-saving aid to people and communities in 36 countries, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. Where there is life, there is hope. And when disaster occurs here or around the world, including being one of the first responders to the Turkey-Syria earthquake crisis, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. We are looking to help the earthquake victims, and we take 0% overhead on emergency donations. So please help improve these efforts. Learn more about our involvement to help the helpless and bring hope where it's needed most. And make your tax-deductible donation to Life for Relief and Development now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's 248-424-7493.
I am Atef Abdel Gawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to Radio Baladu. We are discussing the Israel lobby in Washington, and we'll spend the remaining minute here, 5 more minutes to go, discussing what happens next, the day after in Gaza. And my question now goes to Dr. Jahshan. What is your formula for governing Gaza after the war?
My formula is very simple. Leave it up to the Palestinians to decide. I don't think it's our job nor Israel's job to dictate what the future of Palestine is. If it's left up to me, I would basically come up with an international effort led by the United Nations to supervise elections throughout Palestine to democratically elect a new leadership. I think the October 7th has certainly been challenging for Israel, certainly has been challenging for the US, but most of us have not been focusing on how challenging it is for the Palestinians. I think it's probably more challenging for the Palestinians. After all, their future is at stake, and that's what that event did highlight on October 7th. So I think this opportunity should be used by all parties, above all the Palestinians. I think they should take the lead as far as I'm concerned, and they haven't thus far, to essentially call upon the United Nations to come in and supervise free democratic elections and elect a national unity government that can govern both the West Bank and Gaza, and that can lead to what President Biden and others are threatening to embark on, supposedly the day after, which is a two-state solution negotiations. If that indeed is the process, the Palestinians need to get in shape to participate in that and know exactly what they want to get out of that.
But does the presence of Hamas being a militant group in Washington's view and in Israel's view, does it complicate things?
It complicates things, of course, but that's self-made complication. I mean, at one point, the PLO's presence, the PA, in other words, complicated things, remember? And we still haven't even removed the PLO off the terrorist list, practically speaking, in Congress or in the administration modus operandi. Maybe legally it is kind of off, maybe, but it's still not clear. Two, just notice the language of the president last Friday. The president said, he mimicked again the Israeli position that Hamas has no role in the future of the Gaza Strip. And he talked about supporting Israel's right to militarily and governance-wise prevent Hamas from coming back. But he is not implying the elimination of Hamas. The elimination of Hamas, as Netanyahu speaks about, is the elimination of whatever, 20, 30, 40% of Palestinian society that supports it and belongs to it. It's kind of like saying, I want to eliminate the Democratic Party. How do you eliminate the Democratic? You can vote the Democratic Party out next election, but you cannot eliminate Democrats or members of the Democratic Party. So even the plan itself, as articulated by them, and that's why the Israelis objected. They thought that Biden's interpretation differs from Netanyahu's interpretation. And clearly it does. It contradicts it. I mean, Biden was trying to force Netanyahu's hand in this respect. But in the final analysis, the direct question, answer to your question is it's up to the Palestinians. The Palestinians, if after 76 years we haven't learned this lesson, this is why it's called self-determination. It is not by accident, Atef. It's self-determination, meaning people decide their own future.
Professor Brad, we are left with only 1 minute. What's your formula for the day after?
I don't know that I have a formula for the day after. I certainly agree with Khalil's view about in the median term how it has to develop in order for there to be any kind of governance in the territory, both for practical reasons and for principled reasons about self-determination. The problem is that you have right now a majority of people uprooted from their homes. Many of their homes don't exist anymore. You have a situation where organizing free and fair elections just is not even logistically possible, even if there were the political will to undertake it. So there needs to be some sort of provisional solution for governance, and it's going to have to involve some kinds of outside powers, whether the Israelis are willing to admit that for the moment or not. I don't know to what extent Egypt is willing to contribute to that, or other countries. But there is a necessity for some kind of provisional keeping of sort of reestablishing of some kind of basic order, and most importantly, of course, the addressing of the humanitarian situation first and foremost. That has to come before one can think about actually holding organized elections.
Professor Brad Roth, thank you very much. Dr. Khalil Jahshan, thank you very much, and I will see you again the first Friday next month. Have a good weekend.